Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event, Navigating Climate Anxiety in the 21st Century. We're waiting for our last speaker, but in the meantime, we'll kick off and hear what everyone has to say and start this really amazing conversation. My name is Reese. My pronouns are he, him, he, his. I'm a South African currently based in Dublin, and I'm co-hosting this with Macy and my state of mind. I'm very excited for this, and it's a very relevant topic. I think it's such an climate anxiety is such a diverse topic as well, and controversial in many senses too. But I feel that really comes to one thing I'd like to be the current events happening around the world, whether it be the situation in Ukraine, whether it be conflicts in the Middle East and East Africa. A lot is going on, and for that reason, one can obviously consider the different levels of climate anxiety that a specific person can have. But that doesn't necessarily bring down its relevance or the attention that one should put around it and the conversations that we should be having. So amazing. Should we get started, Macy?
Yes, thank you so much, Reese, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you all for being here, and also thank you to all the folks at Facebook Live. We're so happy to have these amazing speakers over, and I think this is a topic that Reese and I actually came about because it's actually really funny. The story, I think I was meeting with Reese on Zoom the first time we met, and I was telling him about how I wanted like 5 kids or something. I did mention this at one point, and people would ask me like, why do you want 5 kids in this climate? That's crazy. And so I think that the conversation of, like the future generations is like really pertinent, especially in this time. There's a lot of like mental health that goes into the climate that we're in, and also climate in the form of our politics, our economy. And I think that taking care of our earth is like really, really important. And I'm someone that's not really well versed in climate change and climate justice, but I am so excited to also learn myself with some of my friends here today, and I'm very excited. I just wanted to start off with a few conference rules, and this also goes in for the people that are chatting in the live stream. Please, if you are on Zoom, feel free to add in your name and your pronouns. We also encourage you to stay muted, especially while someone is speaking, just to not have any interference with like audio and whatnot. Please be aware that when we do open the chat for any questions for the speakers, please do not use any offensive or ableist language. And also, please use gender inclusive words as much as possible. Instead of saying, for example, hey guys, you can say hey y'all and stuff like that. And also, questions for speakers are only after our main question sets. We'll have a general set of questions, but if you feel like you are compelled to ask something else, please feel free to ask that later on. This will be facilitated by some of our team members, Faith, Yvette, and Quinn, and Kat as well. So feel free to message them if anything comes to mind. They're on this call as well. So also thank you to our co-presenters and partners. A lot of the people that we partnered with work with these organizations. For example, Jocelyn works with Brown Girl Green, which is such an amazing platform to learn more about climate justice and also just about like healthy habits in general. I love following them. Fridays for Future, thank you so much for partnering with us as well. Extinction Rebellion and Queer Brown Vegan. So we're gonna start off with conference host introductions. Again, my name is Macy. I'm 20 years old and I'm a mental health activist. I'm really excited to, again, unpack climate anxiety with all of you and further this discussion, and also give light to underrepresented communities who don't really have this chance to do so. And I'll turn it over to Reese again.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Reese. I also go by Lungile. That's my Xhosa name. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I started out activism with my own organization called EarthKids.org, and we were based very much around using recycling to create early childhood development tools for under-resourced preschools in my city. And from that, yeah, things went on, and that's sort of how I got involved in the environment, obviously at a very different level to necessarily the whole big climate conversation, but very much within recycling and waste management. Now I'm based in Dublin, Ireland, and my focus has sort of shifted to the representation of African people within the activism community. I now work with my friend who's a Congolese refugee living in South Africa by running the European branch of their organization Refuge Me, which is all about empowering African people and refugees to get the same opportunities that all other activists and people have in a world that's mostly Eurocentric. And I think that will come up a lot in today's conversation as well, especially in regards to COP26 and conversations around that. Yeah. So hand back to Macy.
Awesome. Thank you, Reese. And we'll have our conference speaker introductions today. We'll start off with Saoirse. So Saoirse is a climate and student activist, and she began at the age of 13 when she founded a local branch of an international climate movement, Fridays for Future. After leading 3 major strikes in her city, she began to delve into more policy-based activism and becoming a member of the C40 Global Youth and Mayors Forum and Equality Officer of the Irish Second Level Students' Union, where she was able to write a submission towards the Irish government on equality legislation and improving student representation and input. And in November, Saoirse actually attended COP26, where she was able to develop an understanding of international discussion and decision-making processes, met with her national environmental minister and other political and activist figures, as well as protesting for climate justice alongside allies and colleagues from across the planet. So welcome, Saoirse. We are so honored and excited to have you. If you'd like to add on to anything I'd say or say hi to everyone, please feel free to do that.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here, and we really are excited to hear from you today. Next, we have Jocelyn. So Jocelyn goes by she, he, they. Jocelyn is a community-driven creative and storyteller. She primarily focuses on justice movements that center intersectionality and intentional impact. Jocelyn covers on environmental and social justice movements that prioritize communities most impacted by systems of oppression. Relevant intersections include queerness, race, cannabis, disability, and more. They guide those that require interdisciplinary expertise that centers on community growth, creative storytelling, and digital strategy. Primarily, he supports startups and/or social impact projects by building narratives through visual design, copywriting, and multimedia campaigns. So thank you so much, Jocelyn, for being here. If you wanted to add anything else to this introduction, please feel free to.
I also write newsletters for Brown Girl Green. Yeah, green jobs, love it, love it, love it, love it. That's about it.
That's awesome. Please feel free to send us your newsletter. I want to subscribe to that. Thank you so much. And last but not least, you have Keziah. Keziah is a Filipino international at Hunter College, CUNY, taking political science. Aside from being a student, she's also a climate advocate for focusing her work on climate policy, youth empowerment, and other Indigenous groups. Her passion for climate justice and sustainability started as a young girl growing up in the Philippines, experiencing annual typhoons and tropical cyclones. Her work started doing relief efforts in her local community in the Philippines, which later evolved to representing the Filipino youth in the international stage. Currently, she's a partnerships lead at Unify, and in the past, she has led partnerships in the unit of the 16th United Nations Climate Change Conference of Youth, COI16, took part in crafting a policy document for UNESCO on climate education, and served as International Youth Philippine Ambassador and attended UNGA 75, a high-level political forum in 2019, the World Bank annual meetings, and the World Bank Youth Summit. So thank you so much, Keziah, for being here again. Please feel free to add anything else to that and say hi to everyone in the call if you want to.
Hello, everyone, and special thanks for Reese, Macy, and the rest of the team for putting all the effort into organizing this. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that was everyone. Again, we're so excited. And without further ado, I guess we'll start with the roundtable proper. So here we have a set of questions that we've sent the speakers beforehand. These are just kind of like more information and insight on their work and also what is actually going on in the world right now. And please feel free to limit your answers or responses to 3 to 4 minutes per question. And then we'll move on to the specific questions that the audience was able to send in. So Reese, you can take it away for the first one. Very basic question.
Amazing, amazing. Perfect. So let's kick right off. Why do you stand for climate justice, and what role does climate anxiety play in your life? Would anyone specific like to start?
Anyone can start, and also if y'all wanted to do like a rotation based off that, feel free to. Anything goes.
I suppose I'll start off. I just apologies. I actually have COVID. I caught it a couple of days ago, and so my voice is a little bit gone. But yeah, thank you. Basically, why do I stand for climate justice? I mean, the thing is, from a very young age, personally, my parents always sort of engaged me in equality related things. And basically what that meant was every single thing related to every single social justice movement, every single referendum or campaign, my parents would always engage me and my siblings in those kind of discussions. And so I think, I have always, or for as long as I can remember, I've always kind of known that these are issues, but I never felt capable of actually acting on any of these things as a young person. Like, I remember one of the earliest experiences that I had that was, vaguely political. I remember thinking at the time, I was like 12 or 11 or something, and I was like, oh, I won't be able to do anything here because I'm a kid. I'll do it when I'm older. And I think, when I saw the videos of, I think it was actually Australian climate strikes, because my mom is Australian, so she, in her hometown, there's like 40,000 people or something. And I remember looking at that and going like, whoa, what? Young people can actually do something. And so I think that really sort of made me go like, okay, no, I have to like get in on this. You know what I mean? I have to do something here. And so that's kind of what led me to eventually starting the climate striking locally. And, I suppose since then, my understanding of the climate crisis and what climate justice means, as well as climate anxiety as a whole, and my sort of, I can't even think of a proper word, my journey, I suppose that sounds really cringe, but my journey with climate anxiety, really kicked off from that point onwards. And at the moment, I suppose climate anxiety plays a really large part of my life, not just as an activist, but as somebody who just cares about the planet. It is always kind of present. It's always there at the back of my mind. And for instance, it's really difficult because when I'm at so when I'm at school, I almost separate these two worlds, and so I have like the school world and I have the real world. And climate anxiety can often permeate those defenses that I might have put up to separate those two worlds. And that's really weird because it's like an intersection of the school world and the real world clashing together. And it's really weird because, going to school, everything is so like, oh, your future is going to be great. And then, you kind of think about it and maybe you see a photo on your whiteboard and it's like, oh wait, do I have a future? And so that starts niggling at the back of my mind, and then I start the spiral, and and I think that's what I mean when I say anxiety is such a big part of my life. It's climate anxiety, sorry, because it's always present. It's just worrying about this kind of existential doom. So yeah.
I guess I can go next. So why do I stand for climate justice? And I guess Macy also kind of read it in my introduction, is that growing up in the Philippines, I'm guessing Macy did you grow up in the Philippines, Macy? Okay. Yeah. Growing up in the Philippines for a good majority of my life, there was some sort of like acceptance that, these yearly typhoons that would take the houses, the lives of many people was normal. Like it was kind of like accepted that, it happens every year, and the only way to really survive is to adapt. Like there wasn't really that thought of, we can still prevent this, this is still preventable, until I came to the US to study and met organizations like the Climate Reality Project. So yeah, one of the reasons why I stand for climate justice is because like I do see the effects of climate change towards the vulnerable communities, especially those living in slums, those that like people who, like, for example, when you're someone living in a slum, like the least of your concern is climate change, because your number one challenge is like, how can we get food? Like, how can we get clean water? How can we have access to the basic resources? And yeah, that's why I'm here in the climate justice movement, because one of the things that we should do to really push forward or achieve this is to help inspire others through our own stories, our own experiences, and catalyze change. So going on to the second question, what role does climate anxiety play in my life? I would say that I've lived climate anxiety since I was young. Like I would always be scared, like when our school would announce, oh, there's like a signal 1 typhoon. And then my classmates would be like, oh my gosh, we're happy because no class. But then I'm kind of like that 2% of the class that's like, oh my gosh, another flood, another landslide. Like, we'll never know who's going to be affected next, or we're never going to know who's going to die next. Like in the Philippines, you hear stories of people losing their whole family, especially in Yolanda, which was like the largest typhoon that ever hit the globe. I would say that climate anxiety right now as a college student does play a role in my life, in such a way that one of the questions that I do reflect on is, okay, so I'm working hard, investing a lot in my studies, but I don't know if there is a future. Like, if I want to be a doctor, will there even be a chance for me to be a doctor? Like for me to live in a planet that's livable? Like there's so much uncertainty right there. So one of the things that I do to really mitigate climate anxiety is engage myself in meaningful action and talk to people who gives me hope as well. Yeah.
And for me, climate justice and climate anxiety are highly interrelated, because climate anxiety to me is not unnatural. It's incredibly natural. It's my body, my mind, my soul just telling me that there's something wrong that our society, our community isn't addressing. So as easy as it is to, I think, get lost in the cycle of anxiety and climate anxiety, for me, climate justice is about addressing that climate anxiety, because climate anxiety is about the existential threat that is climate change. For me, which was something I've thought about since I was a kid. And for me, I keep thinking about this, but I watched the Hayao Miyazaki movie, Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, and that still remains probably my favorite movie to this day, and the most formative movie for me, because it exactly delved into these issues of technology versus man versus nature, and how can we live in harmony versus disharmony. And it basically got that climate anxiety in me real young, but it's also incredibly valid, because I feel like almost calling it climate anxiety makes it sound like it's not one of the most natural things for people to experience. Climate anxiety is a universal experience, even if we don't even if we don't admit it. Our thoughts about, you know, how we buy and resource management, all of that is impacted by climate anxiety. And so addressing climate justice is, and standing for it, is how I deal with my climate anxiety, and how I really am able to reconcile the difficulty and the scariness that is climate anxiety with the hopefulness and the love and the sort of energy that I have to do something about it.
Awesome. And that was just the introduction, y'all. We didn't even get into the nitty-gritty questions, but thank you so much for that. We'll move on to the next one. And if applicable, at least for Keziah in the past and Saoirse, we wanted to ask if you could describe your experience at COP26 and also what discussions or issues stood out to you. So I know that there's a lot of things that happened, and there's probably going to be a lot of like opinions here and there, but please feel free to share just like the significant highlights. What was it like actually talking with older folks? Because a lot of what we do now is just like with our peers and young people. How is that like? Any two of you can go ahead.
Yeah, is that a, I don't know. I hate Zoom calls because I feel like I'm always interrupting someone. But yeah, COP26, that was a whole thing. Yeah, it was very, very interesting experience because on one hand it was you know, one of the best experiences of my life, and on the other hand it was one of the worst experiences of my life. And so it was just very chaotic. And I remember specifically one of the major thoughts that I had about it was, you know, you try to go into these events telling yourself that, oh, you know, it's going to be really corporate, it's, you know, nothing's going to happen out of it. And I knew that, but you know, I still didn't realize just how bad it would be. Like I remember walking through this massive venue, and you would see these random people with suits walking past with briefcases, or like in the cafeteria on their computers, and it felt really weird because it felt like it was sort of like, you know, I know why I'm here, you know, but why are you here? Who are you people? And there's a lot of very, you know, corporate looking people going around, and you know, it was really mad. Like it was like another world. You know, you went from Glasgow, which is, you know, a European city, is busy, whatever, and then you go into this little world where everything was really badly managed, and you know, the biggest delegation out of any other delegation was fossil fuel companies, their employees. I think there's about 530, maybe less, I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact number. But there was a bunch of them, and you know, you had all these ads, like there's a lot of ads everywhere, and it was just really, really surreal. And the biggest thing for me was I went with a perspective of, you know, maybe I want to get involved in politics one day, or you know, I just generally have an interest in this, and so I'd like to get into the room. But the complete lack of accessibility in this event was absolutely anger inducing. And this is for, you know, for me as a European, I live right next door to Glasgow. I can't even imagine what it was like for somebody who does not live in Europe, because it was so difficult. It wasn't difficult necessarily getting there, but getting into different, like, you know, the plenary discussions, or the, I don't know, whatever, the very specific things that the COP is actually about. You know, not the side events, not the I don't know, the oh, what are they called? There's like a huge room just filled with countries basically talking about how great they were on climate change, and you got like free pens and stuff. I have like so many free pens from that. It's so random. The pavilions. Yes, thank you. I forgot what they were called. That was a whole thing. But you know, the lack of accessibility, and the lack of information about how to access like plenaries, for instance, it was so incredibly like I can't even believe just how bad it was. And you were expected to watch these plenaries online, and it was a bit like, well, I didn't come all the way to Glasgow to watch this online. And so it was just really, really mad. But at the same time, because of how terrible it was, there's a lot of angry young people. And I remember on the last day of COP, we all did a big long walkout, and it was one of the most powerful feelings ever, you know, being surrounded by so many people that have the same ideas as you do, that want the same things as you do, chanting together. And we were chanting things like, you know, decolonize, and I don't know, there's some like really, really great chants that we were doing. And there's like a little circle of us, and we had chants in Arabic and in French and in Spanish and actually in Irish. I may have made that one up, but you know, it works. But it was really amazing to just be in this like really, you know, as an Irish person, you know, the sort of multicultural side of things is often hidden from the status quo. It's behind a very like white, very like Catholic, very heterosexual society. And so like if you want to go to a place that's really multicultural, you have to go looking for it. And you know, but this was a place in COP26 where everyone was together, and it was just absolutely amazing. And so, you know, I think the biggest sort of discussions that really stood out to me was this was one of the first times I was coming into sort of interaction with Indigenous people, because you know we don't really, in Ireland we don't have Indigenous people from Ireland, if you know what I mean. And so I was really, really interested to hear their perspectives. And I think that was one of the best discussions that I kind of would listen into, because, you know, Indigenous rights are just so important, and they're not highlighted in any way, shape or form in most of Europe because of our history. And it was just, and as well as that, the discussions of people who are from the global south, that was really important as well, as someone from the global north, because, you know, the worst that I'm experiencing is a couple of storms at the moment that really aren't that bad. And it was just really amazing, or not amazing, I suppose, but sort of there's a type of anger that I think these discussions cause that are almost empowering, for want of a better word. And I think it was really powerful to have these discussions, and to, you know, find more energy to go back and keep working on whatever I was doing. So although COP26 was really exhausting, it was also really amazing. Just my last thing, I'm sorry, my last thing is that I remember I went to this event and there was a ceremony where there was people dressed in traditional Scottish garb from the Highlands, and they sang in Scots Gaelic, and they did this ceremony with Indigenous people from somewhere in South America. I can't remember where exactly. And it was so incredible because we had like a mix of you know, these two you know, traditional cultures and their traditional wear, speaking in their language, and they were doing this together, and I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. And I did go up to him in the end, and I did speak to him in Irish, because Irish and Gaelic are very similar. And it was very awesome. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences, Saoirse. I know like COP was very draining to a lot of people, and I kind of just want to make my comment on this really short, and also kind of hinge on what Saoirse said about the lack of accessibility. So working with COI 16, the 16th United Nations Conference of Youth, if like, for those who don't know what it is, but it's the official youth version of COP, where the youth policy document is crafted and then presented to the negotiations. As the partnerships lead, one of my main duties was to raise money for COI to happen. And for me particularly, one of the things that I advocated for was Global South representation. I don't know if any of you here went to COI 16, but we did get a pretty much good amount of Global South representation, considering it was the pandemic. But getting there, having like, you know, raising money for the Global South was a whole process. Like, I do remember this call with the UK government, like, I think it was a month before COI, where they were like, oh, since COI is not part of COP, we're not going to issue visa letters for COI delegates. So we were like, okay, so how are we going to bring Global South representation? Like, this conference is going to be only for basically the only people, almost the only people who are going to be at COI are those from Europe or the United States, those who don't need visas. So I do remember in that call, I did have some colleagues who were crying and were like, oh my gosh, like, you know, this is a disaster because it's our future. And, you know, COI is one of the biggest platforms where we can have our voices heard by our leaders. So there was a lot of emotions. And we did a lot of fighting, a lot of negotiation to really get those. In the end, we were able to get those visa privileges for the COI 16 delegates to arrive in Glasgow. But more so on that, sorry if it's quite loud, one of the things that really stood out to me in COP26 was the youth empowerment and the power of young people to really drive change and also just inspire each other. Especially the walkout was pretty amazing. It was phenomenal. I wasn't there anymore because I had to fly back for school. One of the things I also mentioned previously, the lack of inclusivity, especially for young people not being able to really participate in the negotiating table. And there's kind of like, although it's like COVID, there you can't, there's a limited capacity in the rooms, but I feel like like, if you actually look at it online, there's a lot of empty seats. And that was one of the things that we questioned a lot as well. However, I know a lot of people were really negative about COP, but to kind of like put some hope, one of the things that really stood out to me in the conference was I spoke to some representatives from the Climate Reality Project. And for me, for someone who hasn't been to any COPs in the past, it was so overwhelming saying like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Which sessions do I attend? Or like, what are the key points? What's happening right now? It's kind of like going to a game that you don't even know what the rules are or like what stage of the game is. So yeah, one of the things that she really told me was, you know, just have that, like, go back to your purpose, to why you're there. And at the end of the day, it's like to fight for climate justice, to advocate for the vulnerable communities. And to those who might not know, and I really didn't realize this until I was at COP, is that COP really does provide a platform for young people to have their voices heard by their leaders, because not all countries, like, for example, in the Philippines, like, it's really hard for us to have access to our leaders. Like, it's hard for us to present, like, even a document, to have it acknowledged to like a governor or like mayor. It also depends upon the region, but events like COP gives young people a platform and a voice, and also the access to have their voices heard or even get acknowledgement from their leaders. So yeah.
Awesome. That was great. And I love the walkout like aspect of everything you shared. I think that's so powerful. It's like you're walking with everyone. You're just like, yes, I did that. I love that so much. And then our next question, definitely for everyone. Climate anxiety is obviously a new term or phenomenon. How would you define it? And I think if you'd want to connect your experience in, you know, these conferences like COP, right? You know, this is like a United Nations official event. Do you think any part of climate anxiety was discussed in your policy making and also when you meet new people? Reese, did you want to add anything to this question? Because I know you were particularly curious about this.
Yes, so obviously something that Jocelyn brought up already, which I thought was so significant, was that it is a universal experience. One of the conversations leading up to these talks was that some people experience climate anxiety without even knowing what the term is, like the fact that they actually believe in the term. And I think it was also interesting to bring up the things we've been mentioning now with the feelings of, or depending on your geographic location, you could also have different and therefore different definitions of the term. For example, climate anxiety in a place like South Africa, which I know is very much affected by drought and different weather patterns, climate anxiety could revolve around making sure that you have food to eat for the next month, that your crops are going to grow. And in another place, for example, say Russia, something we've seen right now with people protesting against the happenings in Ukraine, protesting isn't allowed. So people being crushed by this oppressive regime just for speaking out in create hope for their future, to show their anxieties to the government, aren't being listened to and being oppressed. And that can only create more anxiety and feelings of helplessness, which is a whole different experience. So I'd really love to hear what you all would define it as.
For me, climate anxiety reminds me a lot of my chronic illness. And so I constantly use my chronic illness as sort of a metaphor or analogy to explain the climate crisis in general. I've had chronic illness my whole life, and I, as a result, have developed PTSD, OCD, ADHD, not completely related to those things, but they definitely exacerbated it. And so whenever I would get this incredible feeling of dread for years out of nowhere, and I wouldn't know why, and I would go to people and ask for help, and no one would explain it to me because, side note, my chronic illness was undiagnosed for 2 decades. So no one understood what was happening, but it was that feeling of dread and urgency to do something, to address my anxiety, to understand why I'm anxious in the first place. And for me, that is exactly like climate anxiety. So the sort of process of discovering my chronic illness and then learning how to treat it and then actually advocating so I can actually get the treatment, because just because there's a treatment available doesn't mean it's accessible. And so it's just the same thing with the climate crisis and climate anxiety. I think we already have the solutions, and I think it's just a matter of executing them and organizing people and coalition building in a way to address that climate anxiety. But it's hard because it's such a universal experience that it's going to look different for everyone, like Reese was saying, whether that be food concerns or you need to have certain trees grow because you need that wood to build your homes, to build your boats, to build anything. And so then you rely on your environment. Anyone who relies on their environment experiences or will experience climate anxiety in the form of those concerns about how will I survive? How will my children survive in the future? And so anyone who has that thought, for me, is experiencing some degree, if not a major degree, of climate anxiety.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I really hate Zoom. I mean, everything you just said there was so incredibly right. So just agree to that. But yeah, how would I define it? I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, or in one of the calls we had preceding this, that I think there's a lot of people who might not necessarily be as engaged with the climate crisis as everyone here is, or even as I am, let's say, for example, and who still feel some level of awareness about the climate. And this usually, I would imagine, would present in anxiety because it's mostly negative, like when we hear about the environment, unfortunately. And you know, for instance, like my peers at school, who wouldn't be climate activists, they wouldn't know that climate change is real, but they might not realize just how bad it is. They often would turn to me and ask me, how long do we have left? You know, like, is the world going to end while I'm still alive? And you know, how long before Ireland starts sinking beneath the waves? And I would kind of, you know, tell them the science, and then when they found out that it would be in, like, I don't know, 100 years or something, they'd be like, oh, that's fine then. But you know, for that split second, they were worried about it, they were panicked about it. And I think that's a resource, first of all, because it's something that we can tap into, because unfortunately we have to panic about this. We have to tap into that anxiety about it, and use it as a means to empower ourselves, like the anger, you know, because these are emotions that could potentially hinder climate action, but that we can use, repurpose for climate action, if you know what I mean. And yeah, so I suppose that's like a major thing for me, the fact that there are many people who don't know what it is, who fear it. Even climate deniers, I would say, some of them, obviously the ones who aren't paid off, um are doing it in terms of fear. You know, they're going, I don't, you know what, I would love to be a climate denier. I would love to, like, say climate change isn't real. I would love for climate change not to be real. I should probably say that rather than um you know, because it is terrifying. And so I think it's really interesting to see that as well. And so I think climate anxiety for me is the knowledge of the fact that everything in a very short period of time has the capability to just change forever and negatively. And I think climate anxiety is the same anxiety you get when you are looking at something, you know, when you were looking at the war at the moment. You know, it's the same feeling you have, because it is both like a feeling you have towards your own environment. And when I say environment, I mean like surroundings, your own family, but also like the world as a whole. And it's sort of a knowledge that if when this is ripped away, it is negative. And yeah, so I just think it's really interesting, because I do think that climate anxiety is like a indication of the fact that, like, the earth is our home, and this is where we belong, and this is what we rely on. It is, again, I'm going to sound a bit cringy here, but it is our mother. You know, it is it we need everything from the earth. We get everything from the earth. And I think climate anxiety is like a really key indication of just how important it is to us as human beings, because we know, whether we're as attuned to climate action or not, we know that, like, it being damaged is a bad thing. We know that, like, losing our homes and being forced to flee, whether it's because of war or because of environment or because of economic issues or whatever, we know that that is inherently negative. And climate anxiety is a response to that, and is sort of, you know, not a recognition that we want to protect that.
So I want to keep my definition kind of like short. So I would define climate anxiety based on my personal experiences with climate justice. So my definition would be like, climate anxiety is the feeling of worrying and hopelessness for the future of my community and my future. Because my community, because I grew up seeing how these tropical cyclones flooded the community, and it, you know, devastated their homes, their lives, their livelihood. And second, my future. Like, I do care about, you know, my education and like where I want to have my print in the world. Like, for example, I made this example earlier, like, you know, if I'm going to work hard to be a doctor, will there even be a future for me to be a doctor? Or, you know, so climate anxiety anxiety looks different to many people. And I really appreciate the way Reese put it out there. Like, you know, it can look like, okay, what are we going to eat the next day? How many trees are we going to plant? But I feel like it's grounded in a sense wherein everyone is worrying about the planet. It's like a feeling of hopelessness, not only for ourselves. I think Saoirse mentioned, like, not only for ourselves, but also our environment, like the ecosystem, the animals, the things that we love. Like, I know Macy mentioned in the beginning, like she wants to have 5 children. Like, will my children even have a future? Will my children even have the chance to see these type of animals, or will they just see it in the picture? I remember when my mom showed me this encyclopedia and she was like, oh, this is a dodo, but apparently they're extinct. Like, I don't want to show my kids an encyclopedia and say like, oh, this is a polar bear, by the way, they're extinct. Oh, this is a bumblebee, by the way, they're extinct. Like, imagine doing that, like, you know, introducing these type of animals to your kids and saying, oh, they're extinct. Like, how sad could that be? I don't know. I feel like climate anxiety, like feminism and other types of social movement, has, like, can look different and can be defined in different ways. But we should define it in a way that it is inclusive, like in a way that it is relatable to others. Because the climate justice movement, like other movements as well, one of the ways that it could be successful, one of the ways that we can channel our anxiety into something that's more powerful, is by empathizing with one another and seeing that, you know, all of us working in the climate justice movement all have anxiety. We worry about the future. Like, we don't even know what's going to happen next summer. Like, each year we're hitting a new hot record. So yeah, I guess climate anxiety can be a source of unity for one another and saying, hey, I know we're different in many ways. We have different beliefs, but at the end of the day, we both experience anxiety. Do you want to work with one another? Because I know the climate justice movement is so polarizing right now. People are like, no, we can't do this because it's Republican, it's Democratic. Like, there's a tendency to talk about climate justice in a political sense that we forget that it's a conversation about the social aspect, not only the political. And I feel like to address climate anxiety, we should talk about the social first before the political. So that's my take on that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, all of you, for that. I think there were so many points that were hit in that question. I think it's definitely still evolving is what I get out of this conversation. And I think there's more to climate anxiety as time goes forward. Also, because like our times right now are so uncertain. So I definitely feel everything that you've been saying. And on a more personal note, aside from the whole definition, I think it's important to ask, how do you specifically tie this in personally? How do you personally deal with climate anxiety? I'd also want to know, like, how do you experience this in everyday life? For me, I definitely think of it when I think of the future. It always ties in, like, what is my environment going to be like? And in addition, if you could give insight, how do you lead your team or organization or networks into thinking proactively on climate anxiety? Because I know all of you do amazing work, and no matter how big or small your team is, I think everyone has that same like notion, like what will tomorrow look like, stuff like that. Yeah, kind of a more deeper question, but would love to hear any of your thoughts on this.
Do you mind if I start? I would say that I once heard the speaker talk about climate anxiety and say that one of the best ways to cure, or not cure, but like to deal with climate anxiety, is meaningful action. And one of the ways that I do that is to talk to people. see and look back the impact that I have made in the climate justice movement. Because I know there are times, especially as a young person, we receive more no's than yeses. We receive closed doors than open doors. So looking back at what we have done, like we not only we empower ourselves, but also empower our own communities. So on a day-to-day basis, like there are days, like as a student, like let me just put it out there that I'm so proud for all of you for being here, for, you know, caring about the planet, because it's not easy to be a young person and be in different roles, like be a daughter, be someone who's working a job, be a student, and also be climate activist. And, you know, just putting those roles together is not an easy job. So thank you so much for being here. So on a daily basis, like, you know, if I'm dealing with climate anxiety as a student, like I usually don't want to go to school nor do anything. So one of the ways in which I do that is I watch Our Planet in Netflix. Like that movie is amazing. Oh no, that show is amazing. Like, you know, just seeing the animals like live in peace, like seeing how the ecosystem is together. So one word that I would like to just put out there in dealing with climate anxiety is holding on to the days that you have, holding on to the present, because we don't know what the future holds, holding on to the experiences that you have, especially with the relationships that you cultivate, because as young people, we're also like, there's a lot that we have to experience. Holding on to those experiences, holding on to those friendships, and to kind of like wrap up, how do I lead my team or organization or networks into thinking proactively about climate anxiety? Living in New York, I do have a lot of friends who are investment bankers, who are like, you know, their job is to literally help fund fossil fuels and, you know, all those other companies that exploit the planet. So one of the ways in which I put forward climate anxiety is asking them about, you know, how do you think climate change is affecting vulnerable communities in the world? Or if I'm with my team sitting with a friend who's also worried about the planet, one of the questions I like, you know, just checking in on them once in a while, like, how's your mental health? How are you dealing with climate anxiety? Is there any way that I can help you? Can I get you, like, can I plant a tree for you, or can I get you a cookie? Like those type of things. And yeah, meaningful action is one of the best ways to deal with climate anxiety.
I suppose for me, to be honest, I don't know if I fully deal with climate anxiety, because, you know, I don't have any solutions, and there are often many nights where I'm just like, well, this is it, lads, and that's just me being honest. And yeah, so, you know, for me, I often describe my relationship with the climate crisis. It has a metronome, and you know, sometimes you're flipping over into the I hope, you know, I really, I know we can do something here. I know that we can save the planet or whatever, and I know that we can make meaningful change, and we can really change the world, because we have those solutions. You know, they are there, and we're developing even better solutions, you know, as the days go by, and whatever, we're at the best point where we could be at the moment. Well, that's not true, but you know, that's sometimes how I feel. And then and then other times, you know, I don't have so much hope. You know, people often ask me, like, do you have hope? And I'm like, that depends on, you know, what day you're asking. And you know, I just kind of wanted to be honest with that, because I think, you know, as someone who's had issues with climate anxiety, I have issues with anxiety outside of, like, I'm quite an anxious person. I have ADHD, so that ties into that a lot. But, you know, so I don't really, you know, I just think words. I just think, dealing with anxiety, sometimes you've got to look at it face on, and that can be really scary. And I don't fully have any solutions. And so, it is difficult when I might be working with other people who might be feeling the same way, because all I can do there is say, I feel the same as you. And I know that this sucks, and I know that it's scary, but like, you're not alone. And I think that that's the really important thing for me, is letting people know that they're not alone in these struggles, that climate anxiety is not something exclusive to them, that there are other people out there who care. Because sometimes you can like doom scroll through TikTok, and like you can see all of these people like arguing with, I don't know, Republicans in America who have like nothing to do with me at all. And then you go, oh geez, nobody actually really cares about this stuff, like it's just me. But I just think if you're in a team, it's really important to say, like, if somebody comes to you or if you notice something, it's really important to say like, hey, I feel that too. And so it's not necessarily dealing with climate anxiety, because I don't have those solutions. But it is sort of saying, you are not alone. This is something that we're all going through. This is something that we're all fighting, because it's something that we all have to fight. And I think that's probably the closest I can get to dealing with climate anxiety, because sometimes, to be honest, it does take over my life, and that's not healthy, but it happens. And I think it happens to a lot of people, where you sort of you feel frozen and you can't do anything, because it's like everything that you see is a confirmation of how you feel, that the world's going to end, or maybe it's not. Or sometimes, I sometimes find myself, when I see like solutions on Instagram or whatever, because social media is where I get a lot of my information, as well as, in terms of environment. Don't worry, it's from reputable sources. When I see solutions there, it's like you almost say, okay, that's not real though. That's not actually going to make a change. So you almost like, for me, I'm almost like my own worst enemy in regards to climate anxiety. So yeah, I just think discussing it and empathizing is the only real way that you can really solidify, you can really deal with it, if well, not the only way, but one of these ways, and the only way that I have found myself.
I really feel that, and I so align with the idea that there's no one way of dealing with climate anxiety. Especially for me, I don't have one way. Sometimes for me, it's helping my community. Sometimes it's seeking the help of my community, because I'm in one of those, I just don't have hope right now, or I don't have the energy to have hope or support other people. And so I just, acknowledging when you need a break because of climate anxiety or other anxiety, that is very, very big in how you should, or anyone should, really deal with their anxiety, is recognizing when you need a break, because your anxiety is just your body and mind telling you, hey, I need a break, and this is where it is. This is the alarm right now that I'm giving off, that we need a break. And so I acknowledge that climate anxiety, and I also remind myself that as much as crazy, as intense as the anxiety feels, it is incredibly logical and rational. It's hard when so many people are so easily say sorry, so easily, I forgot what I was saying. But essentially, that there's no one way of dealing with climate anxiety, and tie it back to something you loved. I saw something like this in the chat, and it's tie it back to something you love that gives you hope, that restores you, because the flip side of anxiety is always hope and always love. And so I just seek hope and love when I know I'm in one of those pits of climate anxiety. And then similarly with how I do it with my team or how I lead with it is I always try to balance, you know, when I have bad news or sad news with some sort of uplifting thing or some sort of I'm here to support you and I'm here. Is there any way that I could help you right now? And acknowledging when it is hard on other people to also experience climate anxiety, because I think the most unfortunate thing we could do is just to ignore our climate anxiety, even if it's with the right reasons, maybe because you feel overwhelmed and don't want to feel as much anxiety. But when you're ignoring that and compartmentalizing that, you gotta open those drawers again and reorganize everything, or else it's just gonna stay very jumbled inside and start to feel not so great, which is part of what climate anxiety, how it can just spiral. And so that's part of why is just addressing it and facing it sort of not necessarily head on, but just being okay with the fact that it's both a very normal human experience and there are also a lot of things you can do to help yourself get out of I just think about it as a climate pit, like a climate anxiety pit of despair. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your answers. That was all very insightful information. And coming from someone who's also not well versed in climate anxiety or climate justice, I ended up learning so much. So, Macy, next question. All right. So our next question is, do you think there is anyone more vulnerable to climate anxiety compared to others?
I can also go on this one because this is, yes. It is primarily so hard on Indigenous communities and other Black communities and communities that are of the global majority of all kinds, but especially the global South. But then there's also disabled people who are incredibly vulnerable to climate change. And there's also women who are incredibly vulnerable to climate change because they especially bear the brunt of so much of what is involved in climate change. And there's all of these things where it's just like there are so many groups vulnerable to climate change. It's almost like who isn't vulnerable to climate change, because y'all need to be doing more. And it's sort of what it is recognizing who is vulnerable, so those who don't have those disadvantages can do something about it and restore the balance. And just Indigenous sovereignty is so important because they protect so much of our biodiversity, which is just crucial to our existence in life. And so it's protecting and empowering these groups that are currently vulnerable is so key to restoring balance and the health and the wellness of the planet and addressing any climate anxiety, because these are the communities that will be able to best create solutions. Hyper local solutions and bioregional solutions are so beautiful and so lovely. And it's hard because we can't make that universal, but that's sort of the tricky part of climate change, is there's no way to universally solve it. There's just a lot of different ways to work towards solving it.
I feel like it was all kind of said there from my perspective, because obviously, in terms of the, like you're saying, like the regional solutions, or the local solutions, whatever, in Ireland, obviously we don't necessarily have an Indigenous community, but we also, that means that everyone, okay, that's gonna sound cringy. Basically, I'm someone who, like, okay, my family's been in Ireland for quite a long time, so although I'm not necessarily Indigenous, it doesn't mean that this is my country, if you know what I mean, as it is anyone's. Okay, that sounds really bad. Okay, let me get this straight. I'm saying that despite the fact we don't have Indigenous communities here, we are still custodians of the land, and it's really important that we find regional and local solutions to the variety of issues that are very specific, as Jocelyn was saying. So but again, I'm just like really saying that is what you were saying is, I completely agree, and I think that's all from my side.
Yeah, definitely. Jocelyn and Saoirse really put out a lot out there. So, and the fact that it disproportionately affects people. So I guess one thing that I would just add is that also in different regions, not everyone has access to mental health services. And even in many countries, mental health has still a huge taboo, like even in the Philippines. So how much more talking about climate anxiety? They're just going to be like, oh yeah, just sweep the floor. Oh yeah, just just get off your phone. Like you're going to be fine. And I would say like, just having these conversations is very, very essential. Learning how to be vulnerable, learning to communicate how you feel in a genuine way. Because at the end of the day, we all feel the same, but in many different ways. But there's like that core source that we can use to connect one another and understand one another.
Just like to add on to that a little bit, because I just loved what you said about making it very specific to the people, is that a lot of the times when I talk to people about these issues, I don't call it climate anxiety because that throws people off. I don't call it climate change. I don't even necessarily discuss the social inequities and all of that kind of thing, because you have to frame it in a way that is approachable, relevant, and relatable to people. And so that's just really important for me when I emphasize dealing with my climate anxiety, because I don't just want to try to deal with it. I also want to be successful and help others when doing it, and help others sort of have a more, not necessarily healthy, but at least active relationship with their climate anxiety. And it's all about reframing it in a way that that person can connect with, that community connect with. And that is the trickiest part, and the hard part is to figure out how to do that. But just knowing that you sort of have to do that reframing in order to reach different groups of people is just super, super useful in any sort of climate conversation, whether you call it a climate conversation or not.
Damn, that's some facts. I was just like nodding the whole time because it was so, I mean, I feel like there's only like one way to really go about it. And there's really like one answer to this question, which is like definitely yes. And I feel like when climate intersects with other issues like human rights and social justice and mental health, there's always a minority group. Unfortunately, wherever you go, there's always going to be a minority group, which is why we should advocate strongly for that. So we've reached the end of the main question set, and we're going to participant specific questions. But we're only going to do maybe one of those questions. You have around 1 to 2 minutes per question, and I'm going to pass it on to Faith and Yvette, which is part of our team, and they're going to ask these questions. These are mixed from the Facebook Live and also from our form where participants signed up. So Faith, if you'd like to share one of these questions, you can go ahead and ask them.
Hi, so our first question would be, are there any book recommendations that can help ease me into the discussion centered around climate action? So this question is by Miel.
I would suggest How to Prevent a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates. It's one of the climate books that has helped me, because climate change, you do have to kind of know the technicalities of it. Like there's like jargons that people kind of have to be familiar with. If you really want to take the path to holding your leaders accountable, because of course there are different ways of like helping the community, or like, there's different ways in achieving climate justice. So yeah, that's for me, definitely, that's one of the books that really stood out to me and helped me see climate change as to what it is rather than what it ought to be.
For me, to be completely
No, you're fine.
to be completely transparent, I don't read any books about climate change. I read basically purely romance novels that are just pretty horrible, but in the best way possible, because I read about climate change all the time in my daily life. But I do know books that are very helpful, including All We Can Save, Braiding Sweetgrass, and I really like both Naomi Klein's book on climate change, but also her articles, which for me are a lot more approachable because I don't read climate change books. I tend to just read snippets or articles because I just don't have the mental or emotional capacity about 99% of the time. Yeah. So that's what it is for me. But also there are so many people who want to do book clubs. I am not one of them, but there are a lot of people who want to do book clubs relating to climate change. So just start that up with some homies and do it, because I'm sure you either know some people, or hey, just reach out to some people on Instagram or whatever platform you use and find out some book recommendations that way. Also, algorithms are very helpful for that. So like going on some sort of website that does book recommendations like Goodreads or something sort of gross Amazon related, but also useful for helping finding those things in research.
Sorry about that. Again, this is why I hate Zoom, okay? But yeah, I mean, again, I'm actually like exactly like Josie. Like I've read a couple of climate books. I read Climate Justice by Mary Robinson, which is a good one to kind of start on the kind of, what climate justice is. And I also started one of Naomi Klein's books because, but I ended up leaving it down for like a year. And then I was like, I forget everything that I've read already up to this point, so I'll just start again at some point. So it's like in my to be read pile, but I have a very big to be read pile. So I would say, like, rather than specific books, I've read some Irish specific ones recently, which probably wouldn't be relevant in the rest of the world, but the kind of genre of the importance of, traditional languages in association with climate. For instance, there's one that I read that's called Irish and Ecology, and that's all about how important the Irish language is and how the diversity of the language actually gives more insight into climate solutions, specifically for Ireland. And, one of the examples in the book was talking about how, I think it's in Sapmi cultures, they have like 40 words for the word snow, for instance, and this kind of diversity really helps to sort of put a context on the type of snow. And that's the same in Ireland. We have several words for different rocks and fields and things like that, and waves. Apparently there's some word that I can't remember, but it means like a melancholic feeling. It's very specific. There's really beautiful words like this, but also they help to actually describe the land. And I think so wherever you are from, and if your country has been colonized, which is unfortunately more than likely, and you don't speak your traditional language, I think it's really important to, or even if you're on stolen land, I think it's really important to find books that really that merge the language of that area or that country or whatever with the importance of ecology and environmentalism. And I think I'm a bit of a mythology nerd as well. So I think another thing is reading the folklore of that area, because a lot of traditional or indigenous folklore is really tied into the land, and so again gives a kind of context for just how sacred the land is, because there are stories that go back thousands, millions of, well, not millions, thousands of years. And it's really incredible, like obviously in Ireland, we didn't unfortunately have writing until a couple thousand years ago. So we have a lot of stories that were changed by not the Catholic Church, but the church, and that's really unfortunate. But at the same time, the really importance of environmentalism and the, you know, the fact that the land is very important and unique to the stories comes across really clearly, despite a colonization of a sorts. And especially if you're from Australia, for instance, you know, that's like, you know, how long is it? How long are they saying now? Isn't it like 65,000 years? Is that way off or something? It's incredible like that. You have a really long history of folklore being passed down from generation to generation. And so it's going to be really specific to the land. And so I would just recommend that. So, you know, a great place to start is Percy Jackson. I love Percy Jackson. Just putting that out there. I'm so jealous of like American people because they get to walk around and be like, gods are watching me, and I have to like do research to find Irish gods because of the church. But yeah, that's.
Wow, I love all of that. And yes to Percy Jackson always. I support that. I haven't heard of that like book series in a hot minute. I think it's been a while. I feel old. But yeah, Faith, we can circle back to you regarding these questions.
So I think now it's time already, but we will definitely email you more questions to our dear speakers. And thank you so much for this conference. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and your ideas and comments. It was really appreciated and really opened my mind, especially as someone who's not at first. At least I get to immerse myself in this more.
Yes, it has truly been amazing, but we're going to end with one last question for closing thoughts.
Oh yes, by Yvette.
Oh yeah. Yvette, you can ask the speakers this question, and if you could do it in a few words as well, that'd be really good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for sharing. That was really insightful. So the last question that we chose was, what is an efficient way to support climate action remotely?
I would say join an international organization that gives you the opportunity to connect with different people, because climate justice, like, it's similar problems faced in different regions. So yeah, and if you're not a Youngo member, be a Youngo member.
I would say just kind of like, this is going to be sound bad, but like just get involved, just get into it, you know. Don't have any reservations. I was 13 and my mother left me on a street for 9 hours, and that's how I got involved in the climate movement. You know, I just think you really need to just be brave and to get involved as best you can. And I think, you know, it can often be difficult to really like make a mark or to get involved in any working groups or anything, let's say, because a lot of youth organizations internationally, and well, in Ireland anyway, nationally, are quite inaccessible, and, you know, quite elitist. But, you know, then you don't necessarily have to make your name just in that. You can create other initiatives, or you can join others, and you can make a name for yourself in terms of your activism. You know, I'm not saying like fame or anything, but like, you know, if you have something important to bring, if you have something important to say, or if you just want to be another body, then, you know, just get in there, get stuck in.
Use what you're already good at, what you're already talented at, what you already care about and do, and just offer it in service of climate movements, climate groups, local organizations, international organizations. There are tons of organizations, and there are tons of tiny, you can't even call them organizations, they're more just groups or communities. Connect with community, because not being alone when you try to make a difference is how you can both increase your impact and also not just lose hope so easily, because there are others to support you, and also supporting others will support yourself. So just do what you can, however you can. If you can knit, sell your knitting and donate it to a climate justice organization. Cakes, do the same thing. You know, maybe you're really good at dancing, make a little thing, do a little, you know, it's, be creative. Any sort of creative skill you have, you can do it. Any sort of technical skill, offer it to an organization for free. And whenever you can, you know, don't burn yourself out, but still just make whatever difference you can. Choose your impact.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for that amazing advice. Also, the knitting, yes, I know that balaclavas are really in, the thing that like covers your face, at least in NorCal, everyone's like wearing that. But yeah, you can do whatever you can. Honestly, like I think all three of you have been a testament to that. And I know that outside of these kinds of conferences too, you're doing your own thing, you're creating things, and it's like all you really need is just to believe in yourself. I know that's like the cheesiest thing anyone could ever say, but as long as you believe in your vision and what kind of change you want to make, it can really take effect. And also it only takes one person. If I can answer this question to whoever asked it, like it only takes one other person to believe in you as well. Like if you start out as a team of two, like that will ripple effect into something bigger, and it takes a while. And you're just probably telling yourself like, wait, this is probably going to go nowhere. But this is literally how at least my state of mind also started. Like we're still a small group of people, but we all really love what we do. And again, thank you all so much for being here. We will definitely post these recordings and little snippets and such like that on our Instagram. And we have our second part next week, and then the third part on the second week of March with a different set of speakers. But thank you so much, Keziah, Saoirse, and Jocelyn. It's been amazing hearing from all of you, all from different parts of the world. And thank you everyone for joining, and everyone on Facebook Live as well. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an amazing day, and we'll see you all soon.